The paper shouldn't have torn like that. A thin, deliberate rip. Too quiet to echo, too loud to ignore. The boy froze in the doorway, backpack half off, breath stuck. Art club room smelled of paint and glue. Afternoon light warm everywhere, except on the table. His drawing wasn't damaged. It was destroyed. Paper ripped clean through the center. Charcoal smeared like a palm dragged across a face. Signature corner torn off, gone. Then the footprint. Dusty, deliberate, stamped right through the heart. Laughter cracked behind him. It's just a picture. The boy didn't move, didn't cry, didn't speak. He stared at what used to be his voice, shredded on a folding table, and understood. Someone had tried to silence him. Permanently. 3 days left. Citywide art competition. First place meant scholarships. Exposure. A future in color. They thought they'd ended his story. That he didn't know it was just beginning. The room didn't rush him. It didn't apologize. Didn't rearrange itself to soften the blow. It just sat there, fluorescent lights humming, dust floating slow through the late afternoon sun. Like this was normal. Like art getting killed on a folding table was part of the schedule. The boy stood in the doorway, backpack half off his shoulder, one strap cutting into his collarbone. His breath stalled halfway in. Not panic, not shock, something colder, something that made the air feel heavier than it was a second ago. The paper lay wrong. He knew that before he even saw the tear. Weeks of muscle memory had trained his eyes. He could spot imbalance the way other kids spotted trouble. A crooked edge, a shadow that didn't belong. His brain had already started correcting it before reality caught up. Then it did. The rip ran straight through the center, ugly and final. Not a crease, not a bend. A tear that started confident and finished angry, as if whoever pulled it wanted to feel resistance give way. Charcoal streaked across the page where a hand had dragged, smearing hours of work into something careless and mean. The lower corner, the one place he'd allowed himself ownership, was gone, cleanly removed. No name left to defend itself. For a second, he waited for someone to say his name, waited for an adult voice to cut through the quiet and fix this. Waited for the room to admit it had made a mistake. Nothing moved. Then he saw the footprint. Dusty, flat, centered, pressed down hard enough to leave a full outline, heel to toe, right through the most detailed part of the drawing. That was when his chest tightened. Not because it hurt, because it explained everything. Behind him, laughter cracked, sharp, brittle, careless. The kind that bounced off walls and didn't look back. Someone leaned back in a chair. Someone else whispered something that ended in a snort. It's just a picture, a voice said. The word just landed wrong, like it had been aimed. He stepped fully into the room. The door clicked shut behind him, loud in the quiet. His shoes sounded too heavy against the floor. Every step toward the table felt like crossing into something he wouldn't be able to walk back from. He stopped at arm's length. This wasn't the first thing he'd drawn, but it was the first thing he believed in. Late nights on his bedroom floor flashed through him in fragments. Knees pulled in, lamp tilted just right, pencil moving while the rest of the house slept. He remembered erasing holes into the paper, chasing a line that refused to behave. Remembered the moment it finally clicked, when the drawing stopped feeling like effort and started feeling like truth. He'd signed it small, careful, like saying his name too loudly might scare it away. Now the corner where that name lived was empty. Behind him, a chair scraped. The bully stretched out his legs, hands folded behind his head like this was entertainment. He wasn't big. He didn't have to be. Confidence did the work for him. The kind that came from knowing the rules bent differently in your favor. "Why you looking like that?" the bully said. "Relax. It's just paper." The boy turned halfway. Didn't raise his voice. Didn't clench his fists. He looked at the bully the way he looked at his drawings. Slow, precise, taking in details other people missed. The smirk. The way his eyes kept flicking to the footprint like a trophy. "You did this on purpose," the boy said. It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't loud enough to gather allies. It was a fact. The bully grinned. "Prove it." That single word did more damage than the tear. The boy's gaze drifted past him, scanning the room. Kids who'd seen it happen. Kids who'd laughed. Kids who'd watched the shoe come down and decided that staying neutral felt safer than being right. No one met his eyes for long. Someone shrugged. Another kid muttered, "You can just make another one." Like time was unlimited. Like creativity was a faucet you could turn on and off. Like this wasn't the piece he'd already poured everything he had into. The clock on the wall ticked. 3 days. That number pressed in his ribs. 3 days until the citywide art competition closed submissions. 3 days until judges, real ones, not teachers handing out participation praise, would decide if his work deserved space, light, recognition, or a rejection letter. The bully followed his gaze to the clock and laughed. "You ain't even gonna make the deadline now." That was the real hit. Not the rip. Not the footprint. The idea that this was over before it ever got started. The teacher walked in then, arms full of folders, voice already moving ahead of her. "Okay, everyone, let's..." She stopped. Her eyes landed on the table. On the paper. On the shoe print that refused to be subtle. Brows pulled together. Mouth tightened. What happened here? The bully didn't hesitate. "I think somebody knocked it down." Somebody. The word floated in the air, weightless, inconvenient. The boy watched her face shift as she looked around the room, measuring inconvenience against truth. Adults did that sometimes. He'd learned to recognize the pause. The calculation. She sighed. "That's unfortunate." Unfortunate. Another word that didn't fit. Her gaze softened when it landed on him. Too gentle. The kind of gentleness that assumed fragility. "Do you think you can fix it?" she asked. "Fix?" He looked down at the paper. The tear didn't answer. Saying no felt like admitting defeat. Saying yes felt like lying. He nodded anyway. "I'll see what I can do," he said. "Good attitude," she replied, patting his shoulder before turning back to the group. "Everyone, take your seats." The bully smirked. The boy lifted what was left of his drawing. The paper bent wrong now, resisting his hands, refusing to lie flat like it used to. He held it carefully, like it might fall apart completely if he moved too fast. As he turned to leave, the bully's voice followed him, casual and loud enough for the room to hear. "Guess we'll see if you were really that good." The door closed behind him again. This time, the sound echoed. He stood alone in the hallway, holding scraps, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Students passed by, laughing, talking about things that suddenly felt small and distant. 3 days. The number repeated itself in his head until it lost meaning and became pressure. For the first time since he'd picked up a pencil, since he'd realized lines and shadows could say things his mouth never could, doubt crept in. Maybe this was the part where stories stopped, where talent got interrupted and never found its way back. He looked down at the torn paper in his hands. Then he folded it carefully, not to hide it, not to throw it away, to keep it, because something inside him, quiet but unmovable, hadn't gone numb yet, and that scared him more than the tear ever could. The hallway emptied slower than usual. Lockers slammed. Sneakers squeaked. Voices bounced off the walls in fragments. Weekend plans, jokes, arguments that didn't matter. The boy leaned against the cool metal of a locker bank and waited for the noise to thin out. He didn't want questions, didn't want sympathy, didn't want anyone asking to see what was left. When the last group turned the corner, he slid down until he was sitting on the floor, back against steel, knees pulled in. He unfolded the paper carefully. The tear looked worse up close. It split the drawing like a fault line, separating what had once belonged together. The charcoal smear had dried into a dull gray scar. The footprint wasn't just visible. It was dominant, pressing itself into every detail beneath it, like a signature written in dirt. He traced the edge of the rip with his finger and stopped. 3 days. The number came back again, louder now that he was alone. 3 days to rebuild something that had taken weeks. 3 days to pretend his hands hadn't learned a rhythm already, hadn't settled into a version of the piece that felt finished. 3 days to convince himself that starting over wouldn't feel like erasing himself twice. He folded the paper again, tighter this time, and slipped it into his backpack. Not to protect it, to anchor himself. Proof that this had happened. Proof that he wasn't imagining the cruelty. At home that night, the house was loud in the way it always was, TV murmuring in the living room, dishes clinking in the sink, his little cousin laughing too hard at something that didn't deserve it. He moved through it quietly, shoulders brushing past furniture, slipping into his room like a shadow. His desk waited. Lamp, pencils, sketchbook stacked where he'd left it. He sat down and stared. Nothing moved. Usually ideas crowded him the second he picked up a pencil. Shapes, faces, lines begging to be pulled out. Tonight, his mind felt stripped, like someone had swept a hand across everything he'd built and left nothing behind but dust. He closed his eyes and saw the footprint again. Not the shoe itself, the intention behind it. He stood abruptly, chair scraping back, and crossed the room, dug the torn drawing out of his bag, unfolded it on the desk. It refused to flatten. Good. He didn't want it flat. He studied it the way he'd studied references online, the way he'd studied people on the bus when they didn't know they were being watched. He took in the damage, measured it, let himself feel the anger without letting it spill. Then he reached for a fresh sheet of paper. Blank. The sight of it made his stomach twist. What if he couldn't do it again? What if the first one had been luck? A moment that wouldn't repeat itself, no matter how hard he tried? The bully's voice slid in uninvited. Guess we'll see if you were really that good. He pressed the pencil down harder than necessary, then stopped. No. He pushed the blank paper aside. He pulled the torn drawing back toward him and did something he'd never done before. He copied the tear, not the image beneath it, the damage itself. He sketched the jagged line first, slow and deliberate. The way the paper had split, the violence of it. He shaded around it, deepening the contrast, turning the wound into the center instead of something to hide. Hours passed without him noticing. His hand cramped. He worked through it. The house grew quieter. Someone knocked once to check on him. He answered without opening the door. By midnight, something had shifted. This wasn't a replacement. This was a response. The next day at school, the pressure followed him like a second shadow. The competition flyers were everywhere. Bright colors, bold fonts, reminders posted on every bulletin board. Citywide Student Art Showcase. Final submissions due Friday. Friday was closer than it had ever been. In art club, the bully watched him from across the room, smirk flickering in and out like a bad signal. Every time their eyes met, the bully leaned back, confident, waiting for collapse. It never came. The boy didn't confront him, didn't complain, didn't ask for protection. He stayed after school instead. Long after the room emptied. Long after the teacher packed up and left the door unlocked out of habit. He worked under buzzing lights, the smell of paint thick in the air, pencil moving with a precision that surprised even him. The tear became a river. The smear became motion. The absence of his signature became intentional. An adult passed by once, a custodian pushing a cart, keys jingling softly. He slowed, glanced in, and stopped. "You staying late?" the man said. The boy nodded, eyes never leaving the page. The custodian stepped closer, careful not to hover. Looked at the drawing. Took his time. "They try to mess this up?" he asked quietly. The boy didn't answer. The man straightened. "Looks like it didn't work." Then he moved on, cart rolling away, leaving the words behind like a marker he hadn't known he needed. By the third night, his fingers were raw. His eyes burned. The piece on the table didn't resemble the original anymore. Not really. It was heavier, angrier, honest in a way the first one had been careful not to be. On submission day, he carried it in with both hands. The bully laughed when he saw it. "That's what you're turning in?" The boy walked past him without stopping. At the submission table, the volunteer took the piece, glanced at it once, then again. Her expression shifted. "This is different," she said. He nodded. She slid it into the portfolio with the others. "Good luck." As he walked away, his legs finally shook. The waiting had begun. Waiting was its own kind of violence. It stretched time until minutes felt like hours and hours felt like punishment for something he hadn't done. The submission was out of his hands now, sealed inside a portfolio with dozens of others, stacked somewhere he couldn't see. There was no fixing it, no reworking a line at the last second, no erasing doubt once it started talking. He tried not to think about it. That lasted less than a day. At school, everything turned into noise around the same quiet question looping in his head. Was it enough? The bully didn't let the silence breathe. Every time they passed in the hallway, there was a look, half smile, half dare. Sometimes a comment floated just loud enough to be heard. Heard they got real judges this year. City people. They don't play. Hope they like whatever that was. The boy never responded. Not because he didn't feel it. Because every word confirmed something he already understood. The bully was nervous. People didn't taunt what they were sure they'd beaten. In class, his teachers spoke about the competition like it was just another extracurricular. Announcements crackled over the intercom about deadlines and schedules. Names read out for sports tryouts, fundraisers, assemblies. Nothing about art. That was fine. He learned early that the things that mattered most rarely got announced ahead of time. At home, he didn't draw. That surprised him. The pencil stayed where it was. The desk stayed clean. Instead, he lay on his bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every decision he'd made. Every line he'd chosen not to soften. Every place he'd leaned into the damage instead of hiding it. Had he gone too far? The first piece had been careful. Meant to impress. Meant to be accepted. The second one didn't ask for permission. That difference sat heavy in his chest. 2 nights before the results were set to be announced, he dreamed about the footprint. In the dream, it lifted off the page and followed him down the hallway, stamping itself on a locker's walls, doors. No matter where he went, it stayed centered, unavoidable, claiming space. He woke up before it reached his chest. The day of the judging arrived quietly. No banners. No assembly. Just a notice taped to the art room door listing finalist names. Students clustered around it in uneven groups, pushing closer, leaning in, reading out loud. The boy hung back. He didn't rush. He'd rushed once before, when he'd first discovered the drawing was destroyed. He remembered how that felt, how helpless it made him. This time, he waited until the crowd thinned. The bully was at the list early. Of course he was. Reading names aloud, laughing when he recognized them, scoffing when he didn't. He stepped aside, just as the boy approached. Guess he didn't make it, the bully said casually, already turning away. The boy didn't answer. He stepped closer to the paper. His name was there. Not at the top. Not at the bottom. Centered. Finalist. His throat tightened. Not with relief, but with something sharper. Something like vindication, though he didn't let himself name it yet. Behind him, the bully froze. What? He said, stepping back in. That's not. The list didn't change. A teacher noticed them both staring and smiled. Congratulations, she said to the boy. The judges were very interested in your piece. Interested. The word felt deliberate. The bully laughed, a short, disbelieving sound. Finalists don't mean winner. The boy finally looked at him. Just once. And for the first time, the bully didn't have anything else to say. The final exhibition was held downtown, in a space that smelled like fresh paint and money. White walls, track lighting, clean floors that echoed when you walked too fast. The kind of place the boy had only seen in pictures. His mother held his hand tighter than necessary as they stepped inside. She didn't say much. She didn't have to. Her grip said everything. His piece was mounted halfway down the main wall. Framed. Protected. The tear was still there. Recreated. Intentional. Impossible to miss. The judges hadn't asked him to soften it. Hadn't asked him to explain it away. They let it stand. People stopped in front of it longer than they did others. Heads tilted. Conversations lowered. A woman leaned in close, studying the jagged line. A man stepped back, arms crossed, eyes narrowing like he was trying to solve something. The boy stood off to the side, watching them watch his work. This was new. Not praise. Not pity. Attention. The bully arrived late. He didn't come alone. Friends flanked him, loud enough to draw looks. His confidence faltered the moment he saw the wall. Saw where people were gathered. Saw the title card. The boy's name printed clean and clear. He laughed too loud. They liked that. That mess. No one laughed with him. One of the judges, a woman with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing, turned slightly in his direction. Not enough to confront. Just enough to register. The bully fell quiet. When the awards were announced, the room filled fast. Parents, teachers, students. Cameras held just high enough to capture reactions. The boy stood between his mother and the wall, hands clasped, heart pounding hard enough to hurt. Third place was called. Then second. Applause rolled through the room in waves. The bully leaned forward, elbows on knees, jaw tight. In first place, the announcer said, pausing just long enough to stretch the moment thin, goes to the boy's name. For a split second, the world dropped out from under him. Then sound crashed back in. Applause. Gasps. Someone said his name again, louder this time. His mother's hand flew to her mouth. He didn't move right away. He learned not to trust sudden good things. Then the judge caught his eye and smiled. Not big, not performative. Real. He walked to the front on legs that felt borrowed. The award was heavier than he expected. Cool metal. Solid. Proof. The judge leaned toward the microphone. What stood out about this piece, she said, was its refusal to hide its damage. It turns interruption into intention. That takes courage. Her eyes flicked, just briefly, toward the back of the room. The bully followed her gaze. Too late. The boy held the award with both hands. Didn't smile. Didn't look back. The footprint that had been meant to end his story now lived under glass, watched by a room full of people who understood exactly what it meant. And the one who had tried to erase him had to watch the world applaud what he couldn't destroy. The auditorium smelled of varnish and fresh paint, polished floors reflecting the overhead lights, so sharply it was like walking inside a photograph. Chairs were arranged in neat rows, judges seated at a long table facing the display walls. The walls themselves were immaculate, white and clean, intentionally blank except for the artwork pinned up like evidence in a gallery. Each piece a declaration, each signature a challenge. The boy Jalen stepped in quietly. His mother's hand held as lightly at first, but as they approached the wall where his work was displayed, he released her. He didn't need guidance. He didn't need reassurance. What he needed was presence. He needed the world to see what had been attempted and what survived. His piece hung at eye level, framed under clear plexiglass. The tear remained, jagged and pronounced, running through the center like a scar. The charcoal smears were deliberate, accentuating the sense of motion the original drawing had carried. But now, they told a story the bully hadn't expected, one of endurance, of defiance, of transformation. The destruction had become art. Crowds moved around him. Parents leaned in, murmuring, whispering. Students stood in front of the pieces, heads tilted, fingers tracing lines they couldn't physically touch. Cameras clicked. Someone crouched to photograph from below, capturing the jagged tear in silhouette against the smooth, white frame. The bully appeared then, striding in with two friends flanking him. Confidence was supposed to precede him. Loud shoes against the floor, smirks stretched across faces, heads held high. But something had shifted already. The energy in the room moved against them. The casual arrogance that had survived the hallways and classrooms of the school didn't translate here. Public attention, scrutiny, genuine acknowledgement. It wasn't something you could fake. Wait till they see this mess, the bully muttered, loud enough for his friends to hear. They laughed, but their laughter faltered halfway. People were watching, judging. Not him, not really. Watching the art, watching the result of what had been broken, and now rebuilt stronger. Jalen's eyes scanned the room. He didn't react. Not outwardly. Not yet. He had learned long ago that power often reveals itself quietly, and that waiting is sometimes the sharpest weapon. He noticed the whispers, parents tilting their heads, teachers exchanging glances, the way adults do when they realize the rules of the game have shifted. Recognition didn't need to be announced to be felt. Judges moved down the wall, pointing at pieces, talking in subdued tones. One judge, a woman with silver-streaked hair and a gaze sharp enough to see the bones of a composition, paused in front of his piece. She leaned closer, eyes narrowing, scanning the jagged tear, the charcoal smears, the absence of the signature. Then she nodded to herself, almost imperceptibly, a small smile of approval tugging at the corner of her mouth. The bully followed her gaze, noticing the attention, misreading it. He puffed up his chest. See? They're just staring at the mess. Nobody's impressed. His voice cracked slightly despite the bravado. Jalen didn't turn. He didn't speak. Not yet, because the moment didn't belong to words. It belonged to observation, to the quiet accumulation of everything the bully hadn't counted on. Presence, skill, resilience, inevitability. Time crawled. The ceremony was slow and deliberate. First, awards for small categories were read. Applause echoed briefly polite. Jalen watched, still quiet. He didn't flinch as the bully leaned forward, trying to gauge reactions, trying to predict how this would land. The bully's friends nudged him. Chill, one whispered, but the uncertainty had already taken root. Then came the announcement for the finalists in the main showcase. The envelope opened. A voice read names. One by one, students approached the stage, acceptance polite, measured. The boy's name wasn't called immediately. The bully exhaled softly, relief already gathering in his chest. But then, Jalen Carter. It landed like a hammer striking glass. The auditorium paused. Students turned. Teachers adjusted their posture. Parents whispered. Cameras swung toward him. The bully's smirk faltered. Just slightly. The confidence he carried into the room now felt like a mask, and cracks were forming. He leaned in, squinting. What? He hissed to his friends. That can't be right. But it was. Jalen walked forward, his steps measured, deliberate. He didn't glance at the bully. He didn't need to. Every step was a statement. You cannot erase this. Every inch of floor he covered, every flash of camera light, every whisper of recognition reinforced the truth. The judge's table loomed. The woman with the silver hair rose slightly, nodding to him as he approached. She gestured toward the audience. This piece demonstrates what happens when art meets adversity. Notice the intent, the honesty, the transformation. This is courage, pure and unfiltered. The words were soft, but they cut like a scalpel in the bully's chest. He felt it. Social power, authority, relevance gone. Evaporated under the weight of public recognition of the boy he had tried to destroy. He shifted from foot to foot. His friends avoided his eyes. Nothing they could say would reclaim it. Jalen accepted the award with both hands. Cool metal. Heavy. Solid. Proof of recognition, acknowledgement, permanence. He didn't raise it above his head. He didn't smile for the cameras. He just held it. Let it speak for him. The audience clapped, cheered, some even rose to their feet. The applause was for the piece, for the resilience, for the undeniable truth of what had survived. And the bully? He shrank against the wall. Every attempt at intimidation, every careless action from before was meaningless now. The social hierarchy he had built with smirks and intimidation crumbled in real time. All he could do was watch, and in watching, learn that sometimes the world itself administers accountability. The judge stepped to the microphone again. We want to highlight that this piece is unique not just in skill, but in story. The disruption, the damage, the adversity, it was all incorporated, transformed, made stronger. That takes vision. That takes integrity. A hush fell. The bully's face turned pale. Words failed him. He had expected chaos, perhaps complaints, maybe a little verbal jab from the boy. He hadn't expected the quiet, surgical precision of public validation. That was worse. The truth didn't need to be screamed to land. It landed anyway. People lined up to photograph the piece. Conversations circled it. The tear, once a scar, now commanded attention. The charcoal smears, once a mark of destruction, now pulsed with motion, telling a story no one could ignore. The recreated corner, the part where the signature had been left intentionally blank, an emblem of endurance. Every step Jalen had taken to rebuild, every hour spent alone in his room, transforming destruction into expression, had led to this. Every second the bully had spent believing he had power, believing he had erased it all, counted for nothing. The bully's friends started to shift, whispering to each other. One finally muttered, "Maybe we should leave?" He didn't finish. Everyone in the room could see what had been attempted and failed. The social collapse had begun quietly, like a slow earthquake. The bully realized he had become irrelevant in a space he thought he controlled. His influence had dissolved under observation, attention, and acknowledgement of what truly mattered. Jalen's mother approached, taking a quiet step to his side. She didn't hug him, didn't beam with pride in a way that would draw attention. She didn't need to. Her presence alone reinforced the gravity of the moment. Safety, support, recognition. The ceremony ended. Students filed out. Parents murmured congratulations. Cameras captured every angle. The boy walked away slowly, award in hand, past the wall where the footprint and tear were now immortalized. Every person who had underestimated him, every observer who had doubted, every bully who thought destruction could win, they had seen all. The bully lingered outside, alone, trapped in the echo of his failure. No one cheered him. No one whispered in his favor. He had been outmaneuvered not with confrontation, not with shouts or threats, but by quiet persistence, by excellence forged under pressure, by the sheer inevitability of truth. And in that stillness, the boy, silent, composed, unshaken, realized something profound. The marks of sabotage, the cruelty, the attempts to erase him, had not ended him. They had prepared him. They had sharpened his vision, strengthened his focus, and made the ultimate triumph undeniable. Every line of that artwork now stood as proof. Every flaw, every recreated tear, every mark left by malice had been transformed into legacy. And the one who had tried to destroy it, forced to witness it all, powerless, irrelevant, exposed. The lesson had landed. Loudly, quietly, permanently. The boy didn't smile. He didn't clap. He didn't speak. He simply held the award, let the room recognize the story it had survived, and walked away, leaving the footprint and destruction behind as monuments, not of failure, but of unstoppable resilience. Jalen walked out of the exhibition hall, carrying the weight of the award in his hands and the stillness of victory in his chest. Outside, sunlight hit his face in a way that made the tears in the artwork glint faintly under the plexiglass. He didn't laugh. He didn't shout. He didn't demand recognition. The boy who had tried to erase him lingered somewhere behind. Shadows of shame wrapped around him. His friends shuffled silently beside him, unsure how to behave in a room that no longer belonged to them. Public visibility had done the work no lecture, no punishment, no argument could have done. Every whispered attempt at intimidation, every boast, every smirk had been neutralized, not with confrontation, but with truth, resilience, and undeniable talent. Jalen's mother caught up to him on the sidewalk. She didn't hug him. She didn't speak. Her hand found his, squeezed lightly, a quiet acknowledgement that said everything words could not. The street smelled faintly of winter and car exhaust, normal and mundane. And yet, in that ordinary moment, Jalen felt extraordinary. He had survived sabotage. He had converted harm into art. Back at school the next week, life seemed quieter. The bully avoided him, hesitant to speak, hesitant to make any move. He had learned what Jalen already knew. You cannot erase talent. You cannot erase diligence. And most importantly, you cannot erase truth. The walls of the school, the classrooms, the hallways, they all bore witness now. Reputation had shifted quietly, but irreversibly. The artwork itself remained on display for weeks. Students lingered, teachers nodded, parents marveled. Each tear and smudge was studied, questioned, admired. The footprint that had once been an instrument of destruction had become a symbol of resilience. People who had doubted Jalen, who had overlooked him, who had sneered, now had no choice but to acknowledge the brilliance they tried to undermine. Jalen returned to his desk at home that evening, his hands still scented faintly of charcoal and paint. He opened a fresh sketchbook, lined with crisp, white pages, and began drawing again. Not to prove anything, not to respond to anyone, but because he could. Creation was no longer fragile. It was fortified. Talent survives sabotage. Effort and vision cannot be erased by cruelty. Adversity, even when personal and direct, can become the fuel for excellence. Respect is earned, protected, and sometimes enforced silently through persistence and quiet excellence. Those who attempt to destroy another's work, voice, or identity will eventually face a reckoning, not through chaos, but through the undeniable clarity of what cannot be hidden. In a world that often rewards destruction and amplifies arrogance, the story of Jalen is proof that quiet resilience and unwavering focus carry a power that is unstoppable. Victory does not always need to be loud. It does not require anger or spectacle. True triumph comes from transforming harm into something stronger, something visible, something that leaves a permanent mark. If Jalen's story hit you, don't stay quiet. Like this video to honor courage, creative resilience, and the power of standing firm under sabotage. Subscribe to Silent Struggle Studios for more cinematic, uncut stories of Black voices overcoming injustice and reclaiming their narrative. Comment below where you're watching from and share your experiences. Your perseverance matters, and your voice is being witnessed. Because the world saw, because talent endured, because cruelty can't erase what's real.